In the heart of nature's vast and wild spaces, some who stand guard have mysteriously vanished without a trace. These brave souls, park rangers, dedicated their lives to protecting the beauty and secrets of national parks. Yet their disappearances left behind haunting stories filled with unanswered questions. Their tales remind us of both the raw power of nature and the quiet courage of those who patrol its edges. Join us as we explore the chilling mysteries behind their vanishing. In the heart of southeastern Arizona, where the Chiricahua Mountains rise like ancient sentinels against the sky, whispers of a decades-old mystery still echo through the canyons. It's not just a story about rugged cliffs or endless desert trails. It's about a man who walked into this unforgiving wilderness and never came back. A man whose name is still spoken in half-hushed tones, Paul Fugate. He wasn't just a park ranger, he was the park. At 41, Paul had become part of the very landscape he protected, woven into its rocky paths, its towering formations, its silent history. Visitors to Chiricahua National Monument knew him by his easy smile and deep knowledge of the land. His colleagues respected his dedication to conservation. His wife, Dodie, knew him as her partner, her anchor, her other half. It was an ordinary Sunday, January 13th, 1980. The kind of day that starts without warning of the storm to come. Paul, dressed in full uniform, badge shining, left the visitor center for a short patrol to the faraway ranch area, a quiet corner of the park that had only recently been added. He told a colleague he'd be back by 4:30 p.m. He waved, he stepped onto the trail, and just like that, he vanished. At first, it was just concern. Then came the dread. As daylight faded and Paul didn't return, the alarm was raised. Soon, a massive search was underway. Tracking dogs, helicopters, volunteers from across the region combing every inch of rugged terrain. But it was as if the land had swallowed him whole. No footprints, no gear, no clue, nothing. For Dodie, it was a nightmare with no morning. "I feel as though a part of me has just been sliced off," she said, her voice heavy with the weight of loss. Days turned into weeks, weeks into years. The questions grew louder. The answers never came. Speculation filled the silence. Did Paul stumble across something he wasn't meant to see? Illicit activity deep in the park's hidden corners? Or was it a tragic accident? An unseen fall? A sudden health crisis? A wrong step in the vast, merciless wild? Without a single piece of evidence, every theory was just a shadow on the wall. Friends like Barbara Elfrant carried the same grief, the same questions. "I don't believe that I did originally, that it would be solved," she admitted, her hope worn thin by the years. And yet, somewhere deep down, they still wonder. Still wait. Then in 2018, nearly 4 decades after Paul disappeared, something stirred. The National Park Service quietly reopened his case. They announced a $60,000 reward, said they had new evidence, but they refused to say what. The silence returned, this time heavier than ever, because it meant something might be known and still kept from the world. For Dodie, the pain hasn't faded. It's changed, hardened. Her voice still cracks when she speaks of Paul. "Paul and I were sort of like two halves of one person," she said softly, as if speaking to the wind. Somewhere out there she believes that missing half of her still waits to be found. Paul Fugate's disappearance is more than an unsolved case. It's a wound that never healed, a reminder that even those who know the land best can vanish into it without a trace. And for those who loved him, the wilderness that once brought beauty and peace now holds a darker meaning, a place where a man's life was swallowed whole, and a mystery still watches from the trees. It was July 1996, deep within the rugged terrain of Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks, when an experienced backcountry ranger named Randy Morgansson walked into the wild and never returned. What followed was a mystery that haunted the mountains and the hearts of all who knew him. Randy wasn't just a ranger, he was the wilderness. Born in 1945 in Yosemite Valley, Randy's roots were tangled in the very soil of the national parks. He'd grown up beneath towering granite cliffs and whispering pines, graduated from Yosemite Valley School, and spent 28 summers patrolling the high backcountry, making the land safer, cleaner, and more understood. To his fellow rangers, he was a guide. To visitors, a gentle steward. To the mountains, a familiar presence. His mornings began slowly, coffee in hand, eyes fixed on the sunrise spilling over jagged peaks. He wasn't in a rush. Randy moved through the wild with reverence, as though the land deserved respect, not control. He carried gunny sacks to collect trash left behind by careless hikers, whom he jokingly called snus Americanus. But behind his calm demeanor and unwavering dedication, something deeper stirred, something quieter, harder to see. On July 21st, 1996, Randy left Bench Lake Ranger Station for what should have been a routine patrol across his 80-square-mile beat. He scribbled a note on his tent, oddly dated June instead of July, and packed lightly. He left behind his revolver. No one thought much of it until he didn't return. Days passed. No radio call, no sign of movement. Something was wrong. When Ranger Rick Sanger arrived at the station and found Randy's empty tent and the odd note, he raised the alarm. What followed was one of the largest and most grueling search efforts in National Park Service history. Over 100 searchers scoured the unforgiving terrain, through snowfields, steep gorges, and dense forest. They found nothing. It was as if the mountains had erased him. But nature wasn't the only mystery. As investigators dug deeper, a more human story began to unfold. Randy had been carrying a weight no one saw. His marriage had crumbled after an affair came to light. Depression took hold. He wrestled with dark thoughts, questioning his worth, his purpose, even his place in the world he loved so fiercely. To his friends, he was quiet, reflective, but inside something was unraveling. The search ended, but the questions did not. Years passed in silence until 2001. Deep in a gorge, near a remote creek, Randy's remains were discovered. It appeared he'd fallen through a snow bridge, possibly injured and hidden beneath ice during the original search. A tragic accident. That's what the evidence suggested, but some weren't so sure. Theories swirled in the high mountain air. Had Randy staged his disappearance to secure benefits for his ex-wife? Was the misdated note a signal? Or was it simply what it seemed? A seasoned ranger caught in a cruel twist of fate, swallowed by the very wilderness he cherished. We may never know. Deep within the untamed heart of Yellowstone National Park, where steam rises from ancient earth and the silence of the wild feels almost sacred, lived a man whose soul mirrored the depth of the land he protected. Dwayne P. MCCclure wasn't just a ranger. He was Yellowstone. He moved through its dense forests, across its glassy lakes, and beneath its endless skies not as a visitor, but as someone who belonged there. Someone who listened when the wind spoke and understood the language of leaves rustling underfoot. From the very beginning, nature shaped him. Dwayne grew up with dirt on his hands and the sound of rivers in his ears. The wilderness wasn't a challenge to conquer. It was a home to be honored. And for over 10 years, he did just that. As a ranger, he watched over Yellowstone not out of duty, but out of devotion. Every morning, as dawn lit the peaks in gold and the mist curled above Yellowstone Lake, Dwayne paddled out in his canoe, a lone silhouette against a backdrop of towering pines and ancient mountains. He wasn't just patrolling. He was part of the rhythm of the land. But Dwayne wasn't only a protector of wild things. He was also a brother, a son, a friend. His laughter, warm and infectious, lingered around campfires and in radio calls. He was the kind of man people remembered, not just for what he did, but for how deeply he cared. Then came the day Yellowstone held its breath. It was May 22nd, 1980. The snow had melted. Spring was in full bloom. The air was crisp, the lake calm, too calm. Dwayne set out on a routine patrol across the waters he knew as intimately as his own heartbeat. Alone in his canoe, he disappeared into the horizon like he had done so many times before. But this time, he didn't come back. At first, there was only unease, then silence, then dread. His radio stayed quiet, too quiet. As shadows stretched across the lake and the sun dipped low, a chilling stillness settled in. Search crews mobilized. Rangers, friends, volunteers. They all came, driven by panic, by loyalty, by hope. They scanned every inch of shoreline, called his name into the trees. They wanted to believe he'd turn up, soaked and embarrassed, laughing off a delay, but instead they found his canoe, capsized and abandoned, floating alone. No footprints, no gear, no sign of Dwayne, just water. Still, cold, unforgiving. The search went on for days, then weeks, but the lake, deep and dark, kept its secrets. And the wilderness, once his sanctuary, offered no explanation. The theories came. Maybe an accident, maybe a sudden storm, but there were no answers, just echoes. In the years that followed, Dwayne's name became more than a memory. It became a legend among rangers, a symbol of both the power and the peril of the wild. His story was whispered to new recruits, passed down with reverence, not as a cautionary tale, but as a reminder. The wilderness gives, but it also takes, and sometimes it doesn't give back. Yet Dwayne never really left, not entirely. His spirit lingers in Yellowstone's still mornings and wind-touched ridgelines, in the rustling of lodgepole pines and the ripple of canoe wakes across glassy water. He is there, in the quiet moments before the world wakes, watching still, because some people don't just walk through the wild. They become part of it, forever. In the quiet majesty of Mount Rainier National Park, where ancient forests stretch toward the sky and snow-blanketed trails wind in stillness, a storm of violence erupted on a day meant for new beginnings. It was January 1st, 2012. A new year had dawned, full of promise, peace, and the gentle hum of life returning to routine. But for one park ranger, that morning would become a final act of courage. Margaret Anderson, just 34, began her shift as she had countless times before, calm, focused, and devoted. A mother to 2 young daughters and a beloved part of the ranger community, Margaret lived with quiet strength. She wasn't just a protector of the land, she was part of it. Every path she walked, every visitor she guided, every snowy morning she met with calm resolve was driven by something deeper than duty. It was love for the wilderness, for her family, for the people who came seeking peace among the pines. But that morning, peace was shattered. Unbeknownst to Margaret, a man was making his way toward the heart of the park. Benjamin Colton Barnes, a former soldier haunted by demons, had already left blood in his wake. A shooting hours earlier in a Seattle suburb. Now, dressed in tactical gear and heavily armed, he roared toward Mount Rainier, drawn to the mountains like a shadow fleeing the light. The park was full of families enjoying the snowy beauty, sledding, exploring, unaware that danger was hurtling toward them. A checkpoint was set up to protect the area. When Barnes blasted through it, the call went out. Margaret answered. She moved quickly, positioning her patrol vehicle across the road, placing herself directly in the path of the oncoming threat. She didn't hesitate. Another ranger, Daniel Kamichia, joined her. They didn't know what they were about to face, but they stood firm anyway. Then came the gunfire. In a sudden, vicious burst, bullets tore through the cold morning air. Margaret was struck before she had a chance to escape or return fire. There was no warning, no time. She had used her last breath to shield others. The gunman never reached the visitors at Paradise. Margaret had stopped him. The forest, once hushed in snowy stillness, now rang with chaos and grief. Rangers and law enforcement surged in, but Margaret was gone. The woman who had spent her life safeguarding this land had become its fallen guardian. A massive manhunt unfolded across the rugged terrain. Barnes fled into the wilderness, hiding in the cold silence he had tried to corrupt. Days later, he was found dead, alone, frozen, consumed by the very land he had tried to invade. Justice, in its most natural and final form, but the loss remained. Margaret's absence settled over the park like fog. Her patrol car, still marked with bullet holes, became a solemn reminder of the cost of bravery. Her daughters would grow up without their mother. The ranger team would carry her memory into every shift, and the mountain would forever echo with the name of the woman who gave everything to protect it. Margaret Anderson wasn't just a ranger. She was a mother, a guardian, a light in the quiet. And on the day the mountain trembled, she stood her ground for all of us. On a quiet summer morning, with the Blue Ridge Mountains stretching endlessly beneath a golden sun, Park Ranger Joseph Joe Kolinski set out on what should have been just another patrol. The date was June 21st, 1998. The air was calm, the wild blooming in full, and the world seemed still. But beneath that peace, something dark was already in motion. Something that would turn this ordinary day into one of irreversible loss. Joe had spent 13 years serving the National Park Service, most of them here in the rolling wilderness of North Carolina's Blue Ridge Parkway. He knew the land like an old friend. Every overlook, every trail, every whisper of wind between the trees. He wasn't just a ranger. He was a protector, a teacher, a father, a man whose love for the natural world was matched only by his devotion to keeping others safe. That morning, he kissed his wife goodbye, left behind 3 children, and drove off to work. No one could have known it would be for the last time. A report had come in. A man at Big Witch Overlook, armed with a rifle, threatening park visitors. These calls were rare, but not unheard of. Joe had responded to danger before. He had the training, the instincts, and the calm resolve that defined the best of the Ranger Corps. He knew how to handle fear without showing it, and as he neared the Overlook, those instincts kicked in again. He spotted the suspect. Dangerous, armed, volatile, but instead of rushing in, Joe radioed a fellow ranger, telling them to hold back, stay hidden, until they could formulate a safe approach. It was classic Joe, protect others first, always. Then he made a choice that spoke volumes about who he was. He turned his patrol car around and headed back to confront the man alone. He didn't flinch, he didn't hesitate. But as Joe stepped from his vehicle, a single shot rang out. The echo bounced off the ridgelines and shattered the morning calm. He never had a chance to defend himself. Another ranger arrived moments later, only to be met with more gunfire. The attacker vanished into the dense forest, swallowed by the same wilderness Joe had spent his life protecting. Emergency crews scrambled. A helicopter raced to the scene. Joe was airlifted to a hospital across state lines in Tennessee, but the bullet had already done its damage. And just like that, the Blue Ridge Parkway lost one of its greatest guardians. The man responsible was eventually found on the neighboring Cherokee Indian reservation and arrested. He was later sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But for Joe's family, his wife, his children, that verdict could never restore what had been taken. No sentence could fill the space where a husband's voice had once lived, where a father's arms should have remained. Joe had been more than a ranger. He was a mentor in officer safety, a trainer in defensive tactics, a role model to countless colleagues, and a smiling, steady presence in a dangerous world. His death sent shockwaves through the Park Service and beyond. In the years since, his memory has been honored in ceremonies and memorials, but his true legacy lives in quieter places, in the rustle of trees he once walked beneath, in the footsteps of young rangers who now patrol the very land he once loved, in the reverence of visitors who never knew his name but walk protected by his sacrifice. Some people take a job, others take a vow. Joe Kolinski lived by that vow, to guard the wild, to serve the people, to never back down when duty called. He stood in the gap between danger and the innocent, and in doing so, he gave everything. That summer day in June is no longer just another date on the calendar. It is a reminder that behind every peaceful view and every quiet trail in our national parks, there are men and women like Joe, watching, serving, risking everything. Joe's voice may be gone, but his story endures, carried in the wind, echoed in the hills, and remembered in the silence where courage once stood.